Hello, welcome once again to Shrewsbury Film Society Online. This week's film that we've selected for watching together and talking about on Zoom is Paris, Texas, the 1984 road movie by German director Wim Wenders, the film which really established him as a big name at the international box office rather than just a niche presence on the art house circuit. You can get a bit of a summary of Wenders' career, including Paris, Texas, from the introduction I gave to his earlier road movie, Alice in the Cities, which came out in 1974 and that we showed a couple of months ago. But just to remind you, we're talking this week, or we're going to be looking at Paris, Texas, and it was part of a series of road movies that he made. Alice in the Cities was one that came before that. And another one that was very influential at the time was his German road movie, looking at the lands on what was then the East German border, Kings of the Road, or Im Lauf der Zeit, The Passage of Time. He made a number of other different sorts of films, starting off with this tremendous film that has been out of circulation for many years, only recently come back in, called The Goalie's Anxiety at the Penalty Kick, which deals with an inexplicable homicide and its consequences. He made a number of other sort of European art house movies, moving from one place to another, including this rather good one, Lisbon Story. And this century, he's been better known probably as a director of documentaries rather than fiction. This one about the Portuguese photographer Salgado was one that was very well received when it came out a few years ago. And in between making bigger films, he's made quite a large number of shorter documentaries, such as these. Anyway, Alice in the Cities and Paris, Texas have a couple of things in common. They both star remarkably good child actors who are both about the same sort of age, actually, sort of 8 to 10-ish, and both happen to be blonde and give really great performances. Both are also about Wenders' continuing fascination with Americana in all its different dimensions. In Alice in the Cities, there was a pretty strong focus on popular music and jukeboxes and city life. And here, I think he's much more interested in the vast scale of the US terrain and the myth of the Western. The opening shots with Stanton stumbling through what is something like the Mojave Desert tell us immediately that we're watching a very knowingly American film, and the one that wants us to evoke the atmosphere of any number of westerns that we've seen in the past. In the decade or so between Alice in the Cities and Paris, Texas, Wenders had become better established and able to work with bigger budgets, and this is therefore a film that is in glorious colour and is really intended to be seen on the largest possible screen. Do notice when you watch it how much blue there is, and also how many red objects, hence my red jacket, to make the point. There's a lot of blue and a lot of red in this film. These are really the dominant colours that I think must be a deliberate echo of the colours of the garishness of Technicolor from the 50s and the 60s. There are also quite a few other bright primary colours and some very dramatic uses of yellow, particularly with an abandoned car in the desert. I think Wenders wants there, with that use of colours, to evoke the emotions generated by any number of dramas that came out in Technicolor. Yet, although he's interested in drama, his style of drama is extraordinarily different to that of somebody like, say, Douglas Sirk. In fact, it's much more like a series of almost Edward Hopper images coming to life, sprung into motion. There is, in this view of America, hardly a crowd to be seen, and even the largest highways, replete as they are with gorgeous, endlessly intertwined concrete curves, overpasses and underpasses everywhere, they hardly have any traffic on them. They're remarkably free of anything that you call a traffic jam, certainly. And the people too, just as in Edward Hopper's paintings, seem to have a very large emotional distance to travel before connecting up with each other. It's probably worth mentioning that this is a long and slow and gentle film. There is a clear narrative. There's nothing really in the way of subplots, but the narrative does develop at the pace that the characters seem to need to adjust to each other and their new relationships, and that's both gradual and unforced. And the main explanatory mechanism doesn't come until pretty close to the end. Inevitably, you do need to suspend your disbelief a little bit to make the film work. I think that's often true. At the time it was shot, Harry Dean Stanton was 57 years old, and Nastassja Kinski was 22. And in the film, their son, called Hunter, who actually was called Hunter in real life, that's the boy's name, is about to turn 8 years old. Now, even as Kinski is playing a character slightly older than her actual chronological age, I think it's still pretty debatable whether a 16 or 17-year-old girl would have fallen for a 50-year-old Harry Dean Stanton. But I suppose these things happen. Similarly, in the very lengthy telephone calls towards the end of the film, she does seem to take a remarkably long time to twig that she is speaking to her ex-husband. One wonders whether she really wouldn't have recognised his voice a bit earlier. But anyway, it's well worth suspending disbelief, because I think you'll be amply rewarded. This is a film that is really very powerful, because it is so understated and because it builds up so gradually. I think the 5 minutes, for example, of home movie footage that come after about 50 minutes of the film are just incredibly evocative and powerful and moving, even though all they do is really show a few people frolicking on the beach in a rather routine way. But there is something about the occasional twangs of Ry Cooder on his slide guitar that generates remarkable atmospherics, both in that sequence and a number of other places in the film. And the big skies and the wide open deserts really do seem to suggest unlimited possibilities for the characters. Because the film moves gently, each action, each gesture carries a tremendous amount of weight. When I saw Harry Dean Stanton's last film, called Lucky, in which he more or less plays himself at the age of 90, a couple of weeks ago, I noticed a scene in which he picked up an old-fashioned telephone handset, and I was immediately taken back to the scene in Paris, Texas, where he picks up the phone. And I think any director who can do something so special with such an ordinary gesture, lifting up a phone, and making that into something that's memorable across decades and continues to resonate, I think anyone who can do that really is a very great film director. And I think Wenders very much fits into that mould. I think this is a remarkable film by a very great director, and I really hope you enjoy it as much as I've enjoyed watching it and re-watching it in order to make this video. And I look forward to discussing it with you in a couple of weeks. Thank you.